Welcome to Anews. I'm Ömer Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. In today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and political analyst Javed Rana will be joining me to discuss the Iran nuclear talks held over the weekend in Rome and the American withdrawal from Syria. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
Iran and the United States resumed negotiations in Rome on Saturday to address the long-standing issue of Tehran's nuclear program. The talks come amid heightened tensions, with President Donald Trump maintaining his threat of military action if diplomacy fails to produce results. The discussions, which are being conducted indirectly, involve Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff. A representative from Oman is serving as an intermediary, shuttling messages between the two sides. This round follows an initial meeting held in Muscat, which both nations described as constructive, despite not having held direct talks since 2015, during President Barack Obama's administration. Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran, which started with the withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal and the reimposition of sanctions, has intensified since his return to office. Despite the growing pressure, Iranian officials have indicated that they are open to negotiations, but they insist on guarantees that the U.S. will not renege on any future agreements. Tehran has consistently maintained that its nuclear program is peaceful and that it seeks to negotiate limitations in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. As the talks unfold, Israel has warned that it may resort to military action against Iran's nuclear facilities if diplomatic efforts fail to curb Tehran's nuclear ambitions. The outcome of these negotiations will have far-reaching implications for regional stability, nuclear non-proliferation efforts, and the broader geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East.
Welcome back to the program. Now we're starting this program with a breaking news, which is actually going to concern millions of people across the world. Pope Francis has died at the age of 88 in the Vatican City. Now, Mustafa, what a sad time to be starting this program. The Pope was a leader for millions across the world, billions across the world. He has passed away. It's a breaking news. We'll have more developments on this as well. He was battling acute pneumonia over the past few weeks. He was hospitalized for at least 2 months, and now he has passed away at the age of 88. Anyway, let's get back to the topic of discussion for today, Mustafa, which is the Iran nuclear talks that were held in Rome over the weekend. Iranian officials and American officials met in the Italian capital, and Oman was facilitating these talks. What's the latest that we know about these talks, Mustafa?
Omar, the United States and Iran held a second phase of indirect talks between them to deal with Iran's nuclear ambition. And the U.S. delegation was led by President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Iran was represented by its Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. They were in direct talks. The U.S. and Iranian delegations were at the separate rooms, and Omani foreign ministry officials were facilitating the talks between Iran and the United States, and they were conveying messages to them as a show of shuttle diplomacy between the United States and Iran. As you know, United States is pressuring Iran not to acquire nuclear weapons. On the other hand, Iran is claiming that they are pursuing peaceful nuclear energy instead of acquiring nuclear weapons. But American decision makers are really thinking that Iran right now is in the nuclear threshold. Some international independent documents are claiming that Iran enriched uranium at least 60%. If you have to acquire nuclear weapons, you have to enrich uranium at 90%. Right now, Trump administration is claiming that Iran will get nuclear weapons. And they are holding indirect talks to deal with the nuclear dispute between them. And I think these type of indirect talks will be a blueprint for striking a new nuclear deal between the United States and Iran. And both the Iranian side and the American decision makers are calling the latest indirect negotiations productive and fruitful in terms of reaching a new nuclear agreement. I think we must be skeptical about these meetings, because the international community should not expect any diplomatic breakthrough in these indirect talks. I think United States and Iran will be supposed to engage direct talks to resolve their bilateral disputes, and I think it will take some time, but I hope the diplomacy will prevail over the conflict in the region.
Mustafa, when we're talking about Iran, we're talking about nuclear weapons, we're talking about treaties, we're talking about different type of commitments that countries have made on an international level. And one of those commitments is the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Apart from that, there's the JCPOA, there's a P5+1. There are so many different terms that we're using when we're talking about the Iran nuclear deal, right? I want to ask you, if you could remind our audiences, what is the NPT and the JCPOA? Because the deal that was signed in 2015 is the basis of Western powers and Iran negotiating how to come to terms about their nuclear program. So let's start with the NPT first, and then let's discuss the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal from 2015.
Umar, first of all, during the Cold War era, Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1968, and in 1970 it took effect. Now, when we talk about a non-proliferation treaty, we have to talk about legitimate nuclear powers in the world right now. United Nations Security Council members are called as P5 countries. They are permanent countries within the United Nations Security Council, and these countries are legitimate nuclear powers. They are the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, China, and France. And right now, at least 190 countries are parties to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And there are also some other nations that do not ratify the NPT. These countries are Israel, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and South Sudan. And right now, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea are believed to have nuclear weapons. And if you ratify a non-proliferation treaty, you declare that we will not pursue to acquire nuclear weapons. Turkey is also part of NPT. And in exchange for that, nuclear power states agree to share the benefits of nuclear energy with non-nuclear states. And Iran is also part of NPT, but we know that Iran is continuing to enrich its uranium stockpiles. And there was a stalemate between the United States and Iran in 2009 about Iran's nuclear ambition. And in 2015, the United States and Iran reached an agreement called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as you say, JCPOA. And there are some other parties to agreement, and these countries are the United Kingdom, Russia, France, and Germany. And they are imposing sanctions on Iran about its nuclear ambitions. And the Trump administration in 2018 withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Actions, citing Iran's negative approach towards the deal. And Trump was accusing Iran of taking advantage of the JCPOA to secretly enrich uranium, to acquire and to get nuclear weapons. And since then, the Trump administration has been pursuing a maximum pressure campaign against Iran and using tough sanctions to convince the Iranian decision makers not to acquire nuclear weapons. Right now, as we talk about it, there are ongoing negotiations between the United States and Iran. They didn't include the other parts of other parties of JCPOA into these topics. I think they will also get involved in these topics to reach a long-standing agreement between the United States and Iran. But I think if the negotiations will fail, Trump is claiming that the United States will drop bombs into nuclear facilities in the region. I think it will increase Iran's ambition to get nuclear weapons. And if Iran gets nuclear weapons, I think it will trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. And I hope all sides will reach an agreement over nuclear issue, and the Middle East region will not get involved into nuclear arms race in the coming future.
The Trump administration has started taking new steps in Syria. Let's find out what they are in this news report, and we'll be back with Mustafa.
The United States has initiated a significant drawdown of its military presence in northeastern Syria, closing 3 of its 8 small operating bases and reducing troop levels from approximately 2,000 to about 1,400. This move aligns with a broader strategic reassessment of U.S. involvement in the region. The decision, based on recommendations from ground commanders, has been approved by the Pentagon and U.S. Central Command. Officials will evaluate the situation over the next 60 days to determine if further reductions are necessary. Despite the drawdown, at least 500 U.S. troops are expected to remain in Syria to continue so-called counter-terrorism efforts. President Donald Trump has expressed skepticism about maintaining a prolonged U.S. military presence in Syria, emphasizing the need to reassess America's role in the region. The ongoing troop reduction reflects this stance, focusing on a more streamlined and strategic deployment. While the U.S. reduces its footprint in Syria, officials have noted an increased military presence elsewhere in the Central Command region, indicating a shift in focus to other areas of strategic interest. Türkiye has long opposed U.S. cooperation with the PKK terror group's Syrian offshoot PYD-YPG. Turkish security forces closely monitor all developments in northern Syria and remain committed to protecting its national security interests. Ankara insists that stability in the region must be achieved through cooperation that respects Syria's territorial integrity and excludes terrorist actors.
Welcome back to the program. Now, Mustafa, the American administration under President Trump has started taking new measures in Syria. Now, the first one is the withdrawal of American forces. How important is this development, Mustafa, and what sort of measures is the American administration trying to take?
Umar, if we want to understand, if you want to understand current geopolitical situation in Syria, I think we have to delve into the origins of the problems. During the civil war years in Syria, the United States was looking for proxy forces to deal with the emergence of Daesh threat in the war-torn country. And during the Obama administration, the American decision makers engaged high-level security and military cooperation with the PKK terrorist organizations, Syrian offshoot, PYD-YPG, in northern Syria. And they used PYD-YPG terrorists as their proxy forces in northern Syria to deal with the Daesh problem. And while PYD-YPG terrorist forces were battling with Daesh terrorists on the ground, United States was providing air support for them to totally eliminate Daesh threat in the region. But on the other hand, Turkey also conducted a cross-border operation against Daesh in the region. And Turkey successfully eradicated Daesh threat from the region. And Turkey claimed that if you want to deal with terrorism issue in Syria, firstly, you should cut your ties with another terrorist group's Syrian offshoot, PYD-YPG. And Turkey rightfully claimed that one terror group cannot be defeated by using another one. On the other hand, as you know, geopolitical situation changed in Syria in last December as the opposition forces took the control of the country. Right now, there is a new geopolitical era in Syria, and Syria's new rulers, led by interim president Ahmed al-Shara, has been taking steps to normalize the geopolitical situation in the war-torn Middle Eastern country. Within this context, in March, new interim government reached an agreement with PYD-YPG-dominated SDF to what can be done to normalize the geopolitical situation in the northern part of country. United States called them SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces. They are trying to change the name of terrorist organizations to hide their support for the PKK terrorist groups. Because, as you know, United States is officially recognizing the PKK as a terrorist organization. And with the agreement reached by new rulers in Syria and PYD-YPG-dominated SDF, right now Syrian security forces are taking control of the political situation in the northern part of country. And as you know, Trump is always claiming that we are supporting these groups in Syria for not in line with the American interest in the region. And he is always reiterating its support for the withdrawal of the American troops in Syria. Within this context, Pentagon has recently announced its decision to reduce American troops' presence in the country. I think if United States will totally withdraw its forces from Syria, I think Syrian government will reclaim its sovereignty over the country. And I think the United States, this decision will help both Turkey and the United States strengthen their bilateral cooperation, because United States' strong support for the PKK terror group and its branches in northern Syria were poisoning the bilateral relationships between two important NATO allies. Within this context, I expect more cooperation and collaboration between Turkey and the United States to deal with any future emergence of Daesh threat in the region.
Musa, what sort of a role is Turkey now dealing with, since the United States is withdrawing troops from Syria? What sort of a role does Turkey get now? And we already know the history behind Turkey's support for Syria. But now, since American forces are withdrawing, what sort of a role is Turkey willing to play?
Umar, since the very beginning of the new geopolitical era in Syria, Turkey has been reaffirming its strong support for Syria's territorial integrity and political stability. Within this context, Turkish and Syrian decision makers are meeting with each other or are discussing bilateral relationships between Syria and Turkey over phone conversation. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, National Defense Minister Yaşar Güler, and National Intelligence Chief Ibrahim Kalın are regularly paying official visits to Syria to discuss what can be done to ensure long-standing peace and tranquility on Turkey's southern borders. And right now, Turkey is also engaging talks with new Syrian rulers to establish new military bases in the country. I think strengthening the bilateral relationships between Turkey and Syria will help the region reconstruct and rebuild the northern parts of the country. I think Turkey is expected to play an important role to uphold security and stability in the region. As you also know, Turkish troops are operating in the northern parts of the country to deal with the PYD, YPG security threats in the region. If there is a problem about Daesh, I think Turkish security forces will be compelled to intervene militarily in the region to ensure both its national security and Syria's territorial integrity. I think United States should count on Turkey's military capabilities in Syria because Turkish military forces proved the successful counterterrorism operations in northern Syria. I think next term will yield positive results in terms of reaching long-standing peace and stability in this war-torn Middle Eastern country.
Mustafa, thanks for your analysis. Now it's time for us to move to the second half of the program, but let's find out what J.D. Vance is doing in India on a 4-day official visit.
US Vice President J.D. Vance is set to visit India during a 4-day tour starting Monday, as the two countries are in the process of strengthening their partnership by negotiating a bilateral trade deal agreement. Vance will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Monday, and the two leaders are expected to hold discussions on economic, trade and geopolitical ties. His visit coincides with a rapidly intensifying trade war between Washington and Beijing, which is New Delhi's main rival in the region. The US is India's largest trading partner. The two countries have now set an ambitious target of more than doubling their bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030 under the trade deal agreement. If achieved, this could enhance the economic cooperation between the two countries and potentially strengthen their diplomatic ties. This is Vance's first official trip to India, and it has added significance for the second family. Usha Vance, a practicing Hindu, is the daughter of immigrants from South India. White House has said the couple will be accompanied by their children, and they will visit Indian cities of Agra and Jaipur and participate in engagements at cultural sites.
Welcome back to the program. Political analyst Javed Rana is joining us now from the Pakistani capital. Javed, welcome to the program. Javed, I want to start off with Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to India. He's on an official visit. It's going to be a 4-day official visit to India. He's going to discuss whole talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And the most important thing that's on the agenda is our tariffs. The tariffs that the United States has imposed on countries across the world, but still we're seeing a pause. So what's on the agenda for J.D. Vance in India?
I think at the core of the agenda is not the trade relation between USA and India. As a matter of fact, it's a bigger picture. The bigger picture is China, because now it looks like US is very desperate to contain China economically, politically, geostrategically. Now, I mean, there is basically, on the face of it, it's a trade agenda between USA and India, and the tariff is going to be reduced. Some discussions are going to take place. There is a ambitious plan whereby they will increase trade by $500 billion by 2030. That is an ambitious plan both India and the US have. Right now, the trade balance is in favor of India. It's around $45 billion, which is India has a surplus trade with the USA. Something US want now that in one way or the other, this surplus trade should be reduced. Let's explore more opportunities. But when they talk about 500 billion trade balance between two countries, that trade is such a huge figure that is something which previously, if you look at the same statistics, around about 400 52 billion US dollar was the trade between USA and the China. Now that is a huge gap. Now, in a similar fashion, I think both countries want to match that gap. Not that China basically will have a 15% loss to its export because US has virtually put a kind of a trade barrier where the trade is not possible. Now, I think in one way or the other, US it seems, India it seems that that gap and that compensation can be made by expanding and more this trade between two countries. But again, that is something easier said than done. And apart from this trade war, I think because obviously India is a small player, US President Donald Trump is likely to visit in the region probably at the end of this year. And this Vice President's visit is also a kind of it will pave a path, basically discuss agenda, what issues are going to be discussed. But Donald Trump's visit would be more focused on defense-related and geostrategic politics in the Southeast Asia. And the focus is obviously South China Sea, where China has built an artificial island. It has set up a military bases there. And in order to counter that, basically US has made an alliance. They call it a Quad alliance with Japan, with Australia, with India, and they want to contain China. That is a bigger geostrategic scene. But again, it is something easier said than done because China has done a lot of its homework. China is basically trying to match with the Southeast Asian countries' concerns about these artificial islands in the South China Sea. And they are basically now talking to Vietnam, talking to Malaysia, talking to Indonesia and other countries, telling them that these military bases are not threat to these countries. And though this is basically what China has done, that is a dispute. All these East Asian countries have raised objection over it, and it is a disputed territory where China has set up military bases. But again, in a broader picture, now China's focus is more on the trade. It is giving subsidies to the suppliers, to the suppliers all over the world to enhance its trade and contain and somehow the other settle its political dispute with the Southeast Asian countries. Now, I think in that context, Donald Trump will visit by the end of this year, and Vice President J.D. Vance obviously will be discussing the contours of that visit. That is also going to be part of it. But certainly the trade agreement between two countries, it will take time. It means that there is no longer free trade agreements among the major economies in the world. WTO, so-called World Trade Organization, which had started off back in 2000, it looks like that it is dying down now with the insane policy launched by President Donald Trump, because it has shaken up the entire international economy. I think let's see how things unfold, but I think in the broader picture, both politics and the trade is at the heart of his agenda.
Javed, we were discussing the Iran nuclear talks that were held over the weekend. Now, the Iranian foreign minister has spoken to his Pakistani counterpart. What are they discussing now? Obviously, all of these countries are on alert. Pakistan, China, India, their nuclear powers. What are they expecting from these talks, and how is the current situation in Asia when these countries are monitoring what's going on in Europe?
I think his call to Pakistan's foreign minister at this particular point of time indicates something else. Though we don't find anything in the official press statement, but my understanding is it may sound like a speculative, but I think Iran has a concern that that Pakistan's may behind the scene, particularly Pakistan's military establishment, Iran had a concern that it may behind the scene support US in the event of a war between USA and Iran. Obviously, it will be war with the US could possibly fight for the apartheid Israel. I think in that context, there could be a possible talk. But again, this is frankly speaking, could be a speculative. Something I said is a speculative because we don't know exactly what was discussed there. But there have been lingering concerns in Tehran that in case negotiations between Iran and the US collapse in weeks and days to come, then there is a possibility that USA may go for some sort of a surgical nuclear strikes, because it has basically brought 52 bombers, and they are stationed in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And in the event, US has been saying time and again that they are going to launch a bigger war. They are not saying it's going to be a nuclear war, but the nuclear experts are pointing out that given the fact that Iran's nuclear program is probably very deep inside the earth, and therefore it will be difficult to destroy it with the conventional weapons, no matter how strong they may be, and the US will have to use the nuclear weapons. That is also a source of lingering threats to Iran, and Iran has been compelled to negotiate with the USA on the terms and conditions which Iran says they are not going to accept, but I think probably they would be agreeing on if Iran is willing to bring down, to scale back the level of its enrichment in the nuclear facility. Now, IAEA has been saying that Iran is just within a week or within weeks, it can make a nuclear bomb. Now, the IAEA inspectors are there, and they've been installed, and they are deployed. And once they are removed, then obviously it means Iran would make a nuclear bomb. I think in that context, Pakistan has obviously some sort of a role in the event of a war. Obviously, my understanding is USA would be expecting Pakistan to provide it a military basis in the southwestern province, Balochistan, which borders with Iran, and also to share intelligence to the Americans. And Iranians would be expecting that Pakistan would not extend a cooperation, but that is something easier said than done. At this particular point of time, nothing can be said.
Javed, tell me about the Russian response, right? Because we've, over the last few days, we're hearing reports, and the Iranian foreign minister has held phone calls with his Russian counterpart as well, Sergei Lavrov. And the Iranian side is asking the Russians to help them with these negotiations. Now, we've seen the response that the Russians have taken in terms of the Ukraine war, and they've been holding negotiations with the United States. What role can Russia play in these negotiations? What sort of assistance can the Russians provide to Iran when they're negotiating with the Americans?
Well, Russia certainly would not like another government going out of its embed. They have already faced a problem when decades-long support they had to the Bashar al-Assad in Syria. After the change of guard in Damascus, now there is a government which is not very much liking to the Moscow. So they would like Iran to be a strong country in the Middle East. But now kind of the situation that is there, Moscow is expecting Washington to help it to have a peace deal with the Ukraine on the terms and conditions of Russia basically occupying the much of the land it has already occupied. So I think Moscow is not in a position to come up with a forceful diplomatic posturing, asking US not to attack Iran. But at the same time, it will try to basically play its role behind the scene, not to pressurize Iran and not to carry out any attack on Iran. But in case there is an attack on Iran, I really doubt that in this situation, when Moscow is already busy militarily engaged with the Ukraine, it would not militarily intervene in any war between US and Iran. And in a broader picture, I think the greater possibility could be that Russia would be providing supplies of the weapons, latest supplies of the weapons. That is a possibility there. But my understanding is that probably Donald Trump is it's a kind of a bluff. It's a pressurizing tactics that he has been employing onto Iran. My understanding is that he would not carry out any attack on Iran, but at the same time, we should not underestimate the level of the insanity that exists in Tel Aviv. This Netanyahu is desperate to create conditions in the Middle East whereby USA carry out attack on Iran, because Iran, Netanyahu believes, is the only threat to the interest of the apartheid state. He has also referred about Pakistan, that Pakistan being a nuclear country is also a threat to Israel. In the past, he has been saying that, but again, he has not been that much eloquent about Pakistan. So in a broader picture, I think Russia's role is likely to be limited. Iran has been calling Russia that it needs to play its role. On the other hand, US wants this direct engagement, though Iran has been saying that it has been talking through Oman, but obviously, virtually, it is a direct talks between Washington and Tehran.
Jawed, we're nearing the end of our program, but before we end today's episode, my final question to you is, the Saudi defense minister visited Iran last week, Prince Khalid. He met Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So, how are you seeing those developments? Are Saudi Arabia and Iran both going to mend their ties once and for all?
I think Tehran had a long-standing concern about Saudi Arabia that in the event of war with apartheid Israel, Saudi Arabia may provide some kind of military bases, some kind of support. I think Saudi Arabia's defense minister's visit to Tehran is a kind of assurance to the Tehran that it would not be partners in any war. But what is going to happen, we don't know. What goes behind the scene, we don't know. But certainly, Saudi Arabia has got a very thick relation with the apartheid Israel behind the scene.
Javed, thank you for analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program today. Mustafa, Anews editor. Mustafa Kojakinar, thank you to you as well. Thank you for your analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program, Mustafa.
Thanks for hosting me, Omar.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Turkey's Diplomacy. As global dynamics continue to evolve, we'll be here to break down the developments that shape our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.